Chinese get credit for inventing printing thousands and thousands of years before Europe, but they would carve a single block of wood and print it. They didn't get the notion of movable type. And movable type, the distribution of books becomes the paradigmatic model for the distribution of any product. It's produced, it's edited, it's manufactured, it's sold, and then sequels are spawned. All products have followed this model, but books were one of the earliest mass-manufactured objects to be put through this cycle. Modern city planning, the linearity of it, the way in which land surveys are carried out, these are all unconscious biases imbibed from the world of print. And they make sense if you're a print head. But one of the peculiar things, notice that animals do not possess language. Many human societies do not possess writing. And very few human societies, and only 2 on Earth, invented printing. And yet once invented, it feeds back into the evolution of social structures and defines everything. And yet it's an extraordinary artificiality. And we have been imprisoned in it for hundreds and hundreds of years now. Now it is breaking down. And we are changing to a different sensory ratio. And you might suppose, if you hadn't given this a lot of thought, that the new electronic media, television, and so forth, would carry us into an entirely different sensory ratio. McLuhan felt differently. He felt that it was restoring us to a medieval sensory ratio. He felt that a television screen is much more like an illuminated manuscript than a page of print. The distinction may seem subtle at first, but if you're looking at an illuminated medieval manuscript, notice I said looking, you must look in order to understand. Reading is not looking. Reading is an entirely different kind of behavior. As a child, you learn what an E looks like, what a printed lowercase e looks like. After seeing 20, 100, 1,000, 10,000, you know what it looks like. You have an expectation of the gestalt of the lowercase e, and nobody opens a book and looks at print unless there's some extraordinary abstract discussion going on. We read print, but we look at manuscript because manuscript carries the intrinsic signification of the individual who made it. And his or her idiosyncrasies have to be parsed through to get the meaning. Similarly with television, television is a very low resolution media. I mean, these are little pieces of light, pixels flying back and forth, and they must be looked at. They cannot be read. And it's an extraordinarily engaging process. That's why it creates an entirely different set of social biases than print does. And McLuhan called these biases, and this was the one distinction or one idea of his that made its way into popular culture. He distinguished between what he called hot and cold media. And usually people botch this every time because nobody really, to this day, understands exactly what he meant. So let me read you a little bit about this distinction. This is in Chapter 2 of Understanding Media, and Chapter 2 is called Media, Hot and Cold. The rise of the waltz, explained Kurt Sachs in The World History of the Dance, was a result of that longing for truth, simplicity, closeness to nature, and primitivism with which the last two-thirds of the 18th century fulfilled. In the century of jazz, we are likely to overlook the emergence of the waltz as a hot and explosive human expression that broke through the formal feudal barriers of courtly and choral dance styles. But obviously it was, when you contrast it to what came before. There is a basic principle that distinguishes a hot medium like radio from a cool one like the telephone, or a hot medium like the movie from a cool one like TV. The transition.
Yes! Welcome back to the ZnZerna Music Hour. It's been a week. I'm honestly suffering from some wild back pain, and things are kind of crazy right now, but we're moving and pressing on, and I've really got some cool things to show you tonight, starting with what we're listening to right now, which is a cover of a Brian Eno track. If I show you on this overhead, you can see this sampler, and I've got a total of 7 loops running on sampler right now. And these loops are copies of the loops that were used by Eno in one of the tracks off of Music for Airports. I believe it was 7-1. The tracks are all numbers on Music for Airports. So I was listening to a lot of Music for Airports when I was doing this exploring of these abandoned zones on this island back during COVID times, and it was super creepy. And at the time I was just like, oh, this is super creepy, and I didn't really think about or know what, why the track worked, or anything like that, composition-wise. So it turns out I've got 2 Eno covers for you tonight, and this one works because it's got 7 vocal samples. There are a couple of ladies that he sampled and himself singing different notes that arrange themselves as chords and unarrange themselves slowly. He got this effect by recording to tape and having different lengths of tape as for each of the sung notes. There's space on each of the tapes for the sung notes, and so one might be 17 seconds long and another is 23 seconds long, and so they end up phasing in and out, creating chords, and for the most part everything that is being played fits within a kind of major structure that feels comfortable, if not a little eerie. But there is one note that causes dissonance each time that it gets played, creating this, and that's the note with the longest loop. And that's the loop that gets played the least, but steady it comes around, making you uncomfortable every once in a while, keeping things from getting too repetitive. Which I find this a very interesting technique. Very beautiful. And that's in the choice of notes and chord structure. Careful. And I'm really unsure. I was unable to track down any kind of information about the lengths of time of the loops, whether or not those were related to each other, which I don't think that they are. I'm not sure even if they are deliberate, or if he just captured these loops and sort of maybe massaged them into place. I'm not sure. But the ongoing evolution of chords is surprisingly durable in terms of time that it can be played without it sounding old. It's surprisingly durable in this way, and that's a result of the careful choice of notes, and especially that long loop with the dissonant note. There it is. Now, along with that playing, I also have some dusty little bits that I've been working on for the piano track that we played last week. Now, the piano track that I played last week is something that is ongoing, and in my studio, I've got all the requisite drones and synths and stuff ready to go for that. But I just wanted to start us out with this little Eno cover, because I really think it's a genius piece of work, and especially for just being 7 loops that phase in and out with each other. I'm going to throw a little McKenna on and sip a little coffee and listen to this. And then we'll move into the track from last week.
Would close the book and he could tell them what was written there. And this was taken as proof of his piety. He was, as far as we can tell, the only man in Europe who could read silently at that time. This was a period when the audio pre-scribal culture was still being assimilated. McLuhan spends a lot of time analyzing this episode in the 14th century when the laws of perspective spring suddenly into being, as somewhat in the way, very similar in the way that fractal mathematics have introduced us to a new superspace. For the Renaissance, spatial perspective was essentially a filing system for visual data. At last they knew where to put everything and where to look for it once they had put it there, which if you have a pre-perspectivist arrangement of space, you have to look, not read, look at each painting in order to locate where the information is. This is, again, this read-look dichotomy. McLuhan never discussed psychedelics, but psychedelics, I think, clearly are an extension of these kinds of media that you have to engage with, that you have to look at, that you cannot read, you cannot take for granted. And these give back
let's go, Jaws, a bite.
A much more
let's go, Seas Futures.
World.
It's good to see you in the chat.
Notice that
Jaws, a bite. I'm almost sure you know about this guy.
It's a world of gestalt, buildings,
Seas
highways,
Futures, what do you know about Eno?
Bridges. We know how these things are supposed to look. We don't experience astonishment each time we enter
if you
a
like,
home.
Have you ever checked out this article on ReverbMachine.com?
Of syntactical expectations in linear space, and when those are
it's really excellent. What's up, Footbags?
Noticeable and becomes the basis for architecture.
It's a good night despite
design
pain.
Innovation or something like that. I think that what's happening, and I think that this would be McLuhan's take, is that all of these new media that attempt to suppress the appurtenances of media are in fact having the effect of returning us to an archaic sensory ratio. And McLuhan was on to this. He is the one who coined the phrase electronic feudalism.
Brian Eno.
And he felt
I don't know why I just
that we were
lost my mind on the name, but Brian Eno, he worked with David Bowie, he worked with a lot of folks that are great,
but
and he himself was a real pioneer and genius
VR,
The tracks that I'm working with right now are from
HDTV,
a thing called Music for Airports. And that's a lot of excellent, eerie soundscape stuff. Long drives, liminal spaces, which kind of inspired the track that I'm working on from last week, which I guess I'll go into by cutting down on the Eno choirs. And we're left with these bits, which I'm going to bring the bits up a little bit. Just some good textures that I really like. Okay. So I've kind of worked out a general structure that I like. And I'm going to run through that with
it's breaking down.
Terrence McKenna.
An interesting question that we would put to McLuhan
playing for a lot
if we
of
had
it.
him here tonight, I think, is to what degree can what he said about television not be applied to HDTV? It seems to me that HDTV is television without the biases of TV. And, you know, a perfect medium is an invisible. A perfect medium is an invisible medium. And print is the least invisible of all media. Print is an incredible Rube Goldberg invention for conveying information. Here's McLuhan on this same subject rather than me dwelling on it. This is from the Gutenberg Galaxy. This is a section called "A Theory of Cultural Change is Impossible Without Knowledge of the Changing Sense Ratios Effected by Various Externalizations of Our Senses," in other words, by media. It is very much worth dwelling on this
regarding
matter,
Reverb Machine. Reverb Machine is a great website where a bunch of stuff gets written up about synth lines and philosophies behind compositions from a bunch of different electronic artists. And they even have some breakdowns that include the sounds from the tracks. So I suggest you check that out if you haven't checked it out before. Jaws the Bite, I feel like they should do an article on you and your process, because
two-dimensional mosaic is in fact a multidimensional world of interstructural resonance.
Some of your material has definitely been an influence for me in terms of philosophy in a major way.
Built on the intense
You're probably the first significant artist that got me thinking about music's role and what music and songs' roles were, and what I wanted my music's role to be in people's lives. Like, not just myself as an artist, but what I would like to hear, or music for what. You know, as an artist, especially as a songwriter, you really want to write songs that, like, I'm saying what I want to say. It's direct, you know, or it's like really specific, kind of, even if it's stream of consciousness still. And
in favor of the audio tactile modes of awareness and
going with a more minimalist or
this matter
lush
clarified,
or
we can much more easily approach the role of alphabet and of printing,
finding that even ambiguity
to the visual sense in language and art, and in the entire range
can have a
social
space
and
inside
life.
of music.
For until we have upgraded the visual component, communities know only a tribal structure. The detribalizing of the individual has, in the past at least, depended on an intense visual life fostered by literacy, and by literacy of the alphabetic kind alone. For alphabetic writing is not unique, but late. There had been much writing before it. In fact, any people that ceases to be nomadic and pursues sedentary modes of work is ready to invent writing. No merely nomadic people ever had writing any more than they ever developed architecture or enclosed space. For writing is a visual enclosure of non-visual spaces and senses. It is therefore an abstraction of the visual from the ordinary sense interplay. And whereas speech is an utterance of all our senses at once, writing abstracts from speech. That's very interesting.
I've got the pianos running through beads.
Association of nomadism to the inability to create architectonic space, and therefore no writing. That a word is a structure, a written word is a structure, and therefore no nomad would ever do such a thing. Interesting. I think he's saying reading is not seeing, and those who read do not see, even when they lift their eyes from their books. They carry the attitude of print into the world. They read, they attempt to read nature, and you can't read nature. You must look at nature. You must see nature. Certainly, I think in my own life, I discovered that this a few months ago, and it surprised me. I'm trying to think of the books that really influenced my life, and I thought of, Moby Dick and Huxley's Doors of Perception. But then when I really got down on it, I realized that a little tiny book Huxley wrote that my mother pushed on me when I was 12 years old, called The Art of Seeing, probably shaped me as much as anything. And in there, it's a very McLuhan-esque graph without McLuhan-esque terminology. And he says the way to overcome, and I think this is very, very, very intelligent and simple advice. Huxley said the way to overcome the print bias, God knows, he was a Cambridge educated gentleman, steeped in the traditions of English literacy and intellectualism, is freehand drawing. Train your eye. Draw nudes, draw seashells, draw insects, and kind of go into nature and train the eye to see, and you will cease to read the world. And readers are emotionally, a seeing person does not want to form a relationship with a reading person. This conflict that we get between men and women and between people about which we call the head-heart conflict is really a reading-seeing conflict. It is the head-heart. It's that readers and seers cannot relate to each other's emotional life because they see such different worlds. So yeah, I think you have a very good point, and the permission to abstract from nature that print created is why we have such a terrible culture crisis. Because, just a kind of a trivial example, it was said by Marshall McLuhan, strangely enough, that the Vietnam War could not be won the way an ordinary war is won because the citizenry of this country couldn't tolerate the sight of what war was. And that modern warfare became impossible when it could be televised into the living room, because war is something that you must read about. You must not see it. It must be this grand thing of the distant clash of armies and young heroes being created. But when it turns into amputation and maggots and screams of pain, the political fun goes out of it. So war is therefore a literary activity. And, the one argument that can be made, I think, in television's favor is if we have to show so much violence on television, let it always be real. The violence is only inconvincing when you're vicarious. If it's real violence, you need to see it because it's happening in a world for which you bear a partial moral responsibility. And I think warfare has been remade by media in that sense. A lot of politics has been remade because imperial doings are usually ugly, brutal, and not something that you want to exhibit before the populace. And yet, modern media makes that very difficult. You get the notion of public morality, or, the people won't stand for this. We have to get this story out. The people won't stand for this. that time. Only collectivity, a kind of community, moral judgment. The medium is the message.
That means a lot to me, Jaws.
That the medium is the thing.
Oh, yes. I appreciate you, Jaws. Thank you for those recommendations.
Every discussion you ever hear since the 60s about TV, for example, is it good, is it bad, terrible, wonderful, the discussion hinges around what's on TV. People say, well, television is terrible, it just shows violence, and somebody else says, no, television is wonderful, those nature shows and news from far away and masterpiece theater. This is a stupid argument. What McLuhan meant by the message, the media is the message, is he meant that it doesn't matter what you put on TV. TV is TV. It has an intrinsic nature. And whether you're showing National Geographic specials or slasher movies, TV will do what it does. It has certain qualities, just like driving a car or skiing. Certain muscles are going to be exercised, certain perceptual systems enhanced, others suppressed. And it's very hard for us to understand this because we have accepted this medium so thoroughly into our life. But in fact, it is shaping our value systems in ways that are very hard for us to suspect or even detect. I mean, television, for example, it's a drug. It has a series of measurable physiological parameters that are as intrinsically its signature as the parameters of heroin are its signature. When you sit somebody down in front of a TV set and turn it on, 20 minutes later come back, sample their blood pressure, their eye movement rate, the blood is pooling in their rear end, their breathing takes on a certain quality, the stare reflex sets in. I mean, they are thoroughly zoned on a drug. And when you think about the fact that the average American watches 6.5 hours of television a day, imagine if a drug had been introduced in 1948 that we all spent 6.5 hours per day on average watching. And the one thing about drugs in their defense is that it's very hard to diddle the message. A drug is a mirror, but television is a mirror. Television is a billboard, and anybody who pays their money can put their message into the trim. This is an extraordinarily insidious situation. What McLuhan wanted to become, I think, was the founder of a general new sophistication about media. And he was essentially parodied to death by, guess what? Media. They made of him an icon of cultural incomprehensibility. Not since Einstein has he been so pre-programmed in advance to believe you ain't gonna understand this stuff. And that's what they said about McLuhan. And consequently, his message is not faith. And we will have to reinvent during the century because we are producing forms of media of such interactive power and potential social impact that we're going to have to go back and rethink all of this. telescope in on that portion of this data that is wrapping around the sphere that corresponds to Northern California. And on your computer screen, you should hear epsilon hum on the cliffs of Big Sur with us sitting in the room inside discussing the matter. Rupert knows I'm wrong.
All right. Wonderful to see so many people turned out after having just been here a scant year ago. I'm delighted that they invited me back. The deal is no jokes about Camaro raffles, no jokes about Moldavite suppositories. So consider it as if it didn't happen. No, it is a pleasure to be here. I'm fascinated by this green and intelligent part of Texas. I grew up with all the prejudices against Texas that you have in western Colorado, where Texans arrive to kill our elk once a year and then depart, leave us once again bereft of glory and thrall. So, I did a radio show, some of you may have heard it. It was an occasion to be up at the campus. Wonderful university. I see a lot of universities, and a lot of them look like Air Force bases. We're very fortunate to have much more fruitful. It's much more fun for me. The audiences in these things are the great joy. And I should say to you, as I say to all my audiences, the psychedelic community is still small and tight, and we look pretty much like everybody else out there. That's part of our victory, I might point out. It's not not that we came to look like them, it's that they finally let it down and now they all look like us. But a gathering like this is an occasion to actually see your local psychedelic community. So take a look around. Somebody in this room has what you need. And it's like an intelligence test, isn't it? All social interactions, isn't it? It turns out. All social interactions, isn't it? I guess I should bring you up to date on what I've been doing before I plunge into the heart of this. It's all social interactions. My own life is my own adventure, how I socially the larger picture of reality. I think everybody sees their life that way. After all, if you're not the hero in your novel, heavy editing. Robert Anton Wilson once said, we should define reality as a plot run by a close, knit group of powerful insight. Yourself and your friends, of course. I mean, if you don't believe that, you have a loser scenario. So what I've been doing since I saw you last is basically a lot of traveling. I went to South Africa last October, and that was an education, non-stop, intensive education, human action, third world, colonial, politics, Dutch Afrikaner history, a whole bunch of things I knew very little about. It was inspiring, challenging, amazing. Africa, the human home, is right now the great theater of struggle for the human soul. How we deal with the political and social problems of Africa is going to say a great deal about how we will be judged by social the problems of Africa are almost entirely created from outside of action. And the solutions which are being produced on native soil need all the nurturing and support that we cheer on the brotherhood of action and give it. And then in February I went to Australia. And if I had known about Australia what I know now 30 years ago, I'm sure my life would be very different. I said last night at a book signing, it's weirdly like Texas. I mean, it's large, it's weirdly empty, and it has a very eccentric population of hard-driving boats. I mean, it's large, weirdly like Texas. Know how to barbecue. I mean, it's large, weirdly like Texas. Okay, so enough with personal repertoire, local color, putting us all at ease, and all the rest of that forensic malarkey. Cut to the chase. When I think about talking to an audience like this, I go through my toolkit and try to say, what is cogent, what's meaningful, what can bring us forward. And there seem to be, it's a changing list, but at the moment, what seems to be going is the old perennial psychedelic alteration of consciousness for purposes of personal exploration, social reformation, creation of a new art, a new politics. That's one of the major pieces of the puzzle. Another major piece is the new communications technologies. And I mean not only the internet, but the software that allows us, each and every one of us, to be animators, filmmakers, visually expressive people who can produce emotionally moving works of great depth and beauty. This is something that technology has brought to us. And strangely enough, a technology largely produced by psychedelic heads, people like ourselves. I told you last year, I think when we discussed drugs and technology, that the only difference between a computer and a psychedelic was one was too large to swallow. Well, great progress has been made in 12 months. In another 3 or 4 years, we will be able to swallow the computer. Some of us may never be able to swallow it. The third piece of the puzzle, which is sort of mine alone to play with, since no one else wants to be this publicly crazy, is the whole business of novelty theory, the approach of a singularity in time that is sculpting the human and natural world, and that is so large an object in the intuitive sphere of human beings that it almost has religious overtones. And then the question for me and the question for you, I suppose, is how much of this can you take without having to take it all? How much of these ideas can you imbibe without having to go the whole distance? And the answer is, it's a personal matter for each person to feel into their circumstance, which means their history, both psychedelic and non-psychedelic, and then to feel into the projection of their future. Do you think you are repeating the lifestyles and algorithms of your parents and grandparents ad infinitum back to Adam? Or do you feel like you've stepped to the front of the train of human evolution, that you are making yourself new every day? If we reach too far back into the stabilizing metaphors of the past, we get rigidity, habit, limitation. If we step too quickly into the unlimited freedom of the future, we lose our ground. Socialism did this over the past 100 years, and because it abandoned any contact with a realistic human psychology, the best intended people ended up creating nightmare society. If your theory is not true to the nature of humanness, you will end up beating human beings like metal on the anvil of your ideology. And this creates great human suffering of your ideology, and this creates your evil of full of your. And I maintain that our own society suffers full of your from a failure ideology, and this creates great human suffering. We have ideas that get stuck. And human suffering full of your ideology, and this creates great
All right, we're gonna wrap it up here. Real quick, I want to thank all my dust cats. Tonight was fun and a great break from and a distraction from being in pain. So. One second.
Full of your
Heck yeah. Thank you to my Dust Cats. Tapes will be coming out this month. And Patreon is hosting videos with the high quality multi-track mixes, as well as a generally weekly broadcast as part of an exclusive podcast of the audio. So if you want to listen to that and support it, you can go on over to patreon.com/ZnZerna. And other than that, I gotta say thanks to the folks who already have all my Digicats, my Zerna Cats, Erica Puig, Melissa Schick, Kenny Creech, Gerard Soltz, Rain Cat, Mike. What's up, Mama Cat? Austin, Eric Akers, Sam Seeger, Visitor 10, Scarlett Herrera, Austin Cat, Dog Fuck flying in overhead, Wayne Anderson, Jen Douglas, the usual suspects, my babe who I know made it home safe, thanks to the miracle of technology. I love you. One Infinite Zero shout out. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to my Royal Blue. Everything is permitted and nothing is true. Make of your life what you will. Thank you, Barry. Love you too. It's good to spend these Tuesdays with you. I'm glad that it's a space that we can be. I'm going to take it out. Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this down.
Somebody hacked this about 35,000 years ago.
I'm going to let the crunchies go. But I'm going to do a little another cover for Music for Airports. Now this is one that is made with pianos, and something that I've found that's interesting about it is that these melodies and sort of phrases come together with this constantly altering spacing, and it sounds very haunting and beautiful, and it just wouldn't work really if they were guitar notes, because you cannot picture a human plucking one guitar note, then plucking another, then waiting, then plucking a bunch. But somehow you can really picture a person behind a piano doing these sort of stilted notes. I'll show you what I mean. So, I have to start each one of these loops. I threw a little delay on them, but I'm saving that for a minute. We've got all the loops running now. So you hear that? It's real pretty. This is 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 8 piano loops running. Different lengths of piano loop, of tape loop. At the time, I'm just running it off a sampler here. Very easy in the digital world. But again, this is a Brian Eno, John. If you're interested in hearing the original John, you'll find it by Googling that. I'm probably going to let this run in my house for another little while this evening, but I think I'm gonna probably say goodnight because that's really what I wanted to say about this track. Oh, maybe we'll listen to it for a little while. Tell me that's not crazy beautiful for being just different loops of tape, constantly looping and sort of phasing the distance between each other. That's amazing. But that sounds that pretty. I think it says something important about music. We're going to take it out. Good night, everybody. tell you. That was fun. great job fucking me up.